One, two, three, four!
Greetings, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. Welcome to our series, Humming a Sickening Tune, where we shall be reviewing every single Ramones song in order alphabetically. Today we'll be discussing Blitzkrieg Bop from the Ramones' debut. The Blitzkrieg was a wartime strategy employed by the Third Reich, which sought, via a multi-pronged attack, to quickly and completely overwhelm and dominate adversaries on the battlefield. And having, in just under 2 years, despite the limitations of their abilities, settled on a group lineup, designated aesthetic parameters, composed upwards of a couple dozen songs, found an identifiable presentation venue, and cemented it as a home base for an entire scene, and movement, no less, which they spearheaded, recording demos and video performances, dazzling established scenester Danny Fields into a management deal, and having landed a recording contract, were no doubt feeling that the arc of their ascension was unstoppable, if not by strictest German definitions, lightning quick. And in this spirit, they opted for a relatively more recent composition, Blitzkrieg Bop, as their first single and the lead-off track off their debut LP. Primarily composed by Tommy, the song is sprung from the, at first glance, absurd competitive obsession the group had with 70s Scottish pop teen heartthrobs, the Bay City Rollers, or at least what was briefly perceived to be their Beatles-level popularity, along with their most popular worldwide 1976 #1 smash, Saturday Night, co-opting the unforgettable featured chant-along hook concept. Of course, later they would more brazenly mimic the chant melody on their track Do You Remember Rock and Roll Radio, although it's fair enough to say both that and Saturday Night derive from the 60s garage rock and eventual marching band classic Let's Go Pony by the Routers. Wisely chosen as their initial premiere impression track, with Johnny and Dee Dee marrying their limited aspirations with a ferocious precision and boasting a cunningly mapped out construction built around games in 1-4-5 and A, which belie the seeming nature of their amateurism. The hook-filled 2 minutes and change crams in both dramatic build-ups and a 2-5-1 turnaround bridge, apparently shanghaied from British Invasion Dave Clark 5 hit Any Way You Want It. And please see my Ramones review of their cover. I'll have a link below in the description. The undeniable anthem quickly became a spotlighted highlight, earning a spot near the beginning of every live performance. So it becomes something of a satisfying circle closing for the Ramones to have chosen a cover of the Dave Clark 5 hit as the final song at their final show, regardless of the dubious guest spot contributions of Pearl Jam's Eddie Vedder. As noted elsewhere, the hard stereo separation and overall dry brittleness of the tracks were one of the song's only notable detriments, certain to not work in favor of the single's commercial appeal. So an alternate mix was generated for the 45, satisfyingly imbuing the track in fat mono, with guitars and bass finally charging out of both speakers, the increased throb plainly evident when the two takes are compared side by side. The vocals have also been sweetened with a minimal amount of echo and reverb protection. All in all, a tantalizing glimpse, for those lacking vintage stereo receivers with a mono switch, into the alternate reality sonic potential had the first record leaned a little bit more towards the punch of the demos. Decades later, an expanded and then deluxe edition of the debut would finally realize the long-held, widely desired fantasy, a complete mono mix of the entire first record. And one can only wonder what might have been had the commercial engineering sheen possibilities been maximized initially. But perhaps for the Ramones, hit-making was simply never really in the cards. Even more so than their blindingly energetic, against the prevalent current primitivism, the Ramones always had their pervasive, collectively sick senses of humor working against them. And this brings us to the juncture where we must discuss the Ramones and Dee Dee's specifically preoccupation with Germany and the Nazis. Tommy had penned a joyous lyric celebrating rock and roll fandom and concert attendance called Animal Hop, but Dee Dee suggested not only a title change, his other substitutions significantly muddled their narrative loyalties and reinforced their outsider vantage point by gleefully suggesting that the anticipatory cues of fans should now all be shot in the back. In a career full of demented humor, one of their most maliciously delicious non sequitur jokes. This, coupled with the ludicrously foreboding title, made allusions to heated bodies piling up, vaguely discomforting and distasteful, underlying an unforeseen fascistic undercurrent, and were no doubt deeply ingrained in the childhood psyche of Dee Dee, raised in a half-American, half-German army brat family among the World War II torn and still memorabilia-strewn landscape rubble of Berlin. Indeed, mental illness aside, this would remain his primary songwriting obsession, not only scattered about the entirety of his remaining musical career, but also bookending the first and last tracks of this debut LP. And relishing such perversity no doubt contributed to the single's lack of chart action, and judging success by the shallowest standards of barometer yardsticks, they perhaps imagined that they had lost a significant battle, despite their unlikely envisioned dream marriage of the Stooges to bubblegum coming to quick fruition. But in the ensuing decades, the Blitzkrieg Bop, as it was called on the awesome punk magazine-inspired 45 sleeve, defined not only the group's sound, but the aesthetic of an entire genre, exuberantly exhorted in communal frenzy and performance after performance across the country and then around the world, and even more so in the years following the end of the band and band members' inevitable deaths. An inarguable anthem of an appreciative underground audience, but also an undeniable influential pivot point for hundreds of bands, and a rallying cry counting multiple generations of musicians amongst the followers. Increasing incrementally in infamy until finally achieving instantly recognizable classic mainstream ubiquity, from a quick parental gap punchline in the popular film Vacation to sports stadium soundtrack familiarity, even including notably Johnny's beloved Yankee Stadium. There can no longer be any question, there can be no more debate that in the long haul, the Ramones finally won the war. What do I like least about this track? Well, of course I love almost everything about this track, but I think for anyone who's ever attended or seen footage of a Ramones performance, they know that the set is punctuated at regular intervals with exciting crowd chants, highlighted by Pinhead's Gabba Gabba Hey, or Cretin Hop, or the climax of We're a Happy Family. But oddly enough, the original studio versions of these songs failed to convey the tribal excitement of these songs' sections. And perhaps none of them fails more totally than Blitzkrieg Bop's Hey Ho, Let's Go. Indeed, one need look no further than Saturday Night by the Bay City Rollers, Blitzkrieg Bop's supposed guidepost-influenced predecessor, to truly experience an infectious gang mass chorus hook. I've already discussed, and will discuss more in the future, the problems with the approach to the mix on this record in retrospect. But this is one track that really underlines Joey's eccentric and bizarre initial vocal stylings. And mind you, this is the first song on the first record, so it's most people's introduction to what the band is going to sound like. And Joey, post-British invasion but pre-punk, is taking on this very odd British accent affectation. And of course, the trebly nature of the mix does practically nothing to protect him, and what we are left with is where one anticipates a big, throaty, hey-ho, let's go, we get literally, oi, oh, let's go. And speaking of Nazis, well, perhaps the less said about this trope-establishing, genre-labeling utterance, the better.
And I'm pretty sure I had seen live footage of the band before I heard this record, so I was pretty surprised hearing it for the first time. And this under-emoting, if you will, continues to be a later problem, similarly on the later recordings of Pinhead and We're a Happy Family. As we previously noted, the 45 mix not only brought the track to fat mono, but also offered a slight amount of sweetening, which not only offered Joey's vocal a minimal amount of protection, but also slightly nudged the suggestion of crowd chant flavor towards ideal levels. But, of course, it would take sometime later stadiums full of fans to truly bring the full-throated roar of what the original studio recording had failed to capture.
What do I like most about Blitzkrieg Bop? Well, I love the blues. And I've long noted that almost all of my favorite music is in some manner blues-related. But paradoxically, my favorite band is the Ramones. And their seeming disconnect from blues roots, not to mention some kind of poorly aging initial statements seeking to distance themselves from supposedly blues-based music, but more away from the overindulgencies of blues rock like Led Zeppelin and their 70s ilk, in favor of more wise-ass comedic portrayals of white teenage loserdom, creating possibly a conundrum. But with the 2-5-1 turnaround of this song, that is, the chord change wrapped around the lyric, they're all revved up and ready to go, as previously noted, is likely lifted from the similar middle to Any Way You Want It. But this 2-5-1 change is something that I've always identified with the jazzier, sort of country ragtime constructs of pre-electric folk blues. You also hear it a lot in sort of the jazzier blues of Bessie Smith and that sort of era. But having spotted this, of course, I immediately correlated instances in the Ramones' music built upon the blues' most significant reflection in rock and roll's defining parameters, which is, of course, the 1-4-5 construct. Now, I don't want this to get too technical. I guess if I'm trying to explain this to a person, I would describe what your basic sort of Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, or Little Richard especially sort of song sounds like. It starts in the key of 1-1-1-1-1-1, then it comes up to 4-4-4-4-4. Then it goes back down to 1-1-1-1, then up to 5-5-5, 4-4-4-4-4, 1-1-1-1-1, then usually 5-5. But even if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, you could probably hear the change in your head and your heart, as it is an ever-prevalent pattern in virtually all popular Western music which derives from folk forms. For other hard rock examples, you might look to AC/DC, of course, their Let There Be Rock toys with the familiarities of the changes, but their song Rocker is a flagrant utilization of the typical layout. Also, Motorhead, another spiritual cousin to the Ramones, offers a multitude of examples of 1-4-5 game melodies, as well as flagrant pastiches like Going to Brazil. And of course, let's not forget Lemmy's unforgettable performance of Chuck Berry's Let It Rock on American TV in the 90s. I'll put a link in the description below. It's surely as clear an example as one might hope for what is the backbone of rock and roll's historical sound. But you don't have to just limit yourself to merely building the song around the 1-4-5 layout. You can also formularize a riff around a 1-4-5 change. And rock critic Lester Bangs once knowingly summarized a bunch of garage rock history, charting the 1-4-5 riff of La Bamba, to the 1-4-5 of Louie Louie, to the 1-4-5 riff of Wild Thing, to the 1-4-5 riff of Blitzkrieg Bop, which he then humorously noted sounded awfully similar to La Bamba. As Lester said, there you have it. Rock and roll history played in 3 chords, performed more primitively every time they are recycled. And of course, one fascinating thing about Blitzkrieg Bop is that not only does it travel through the 1-4-5 template in A, D, and E, but it is also built around a principal riff, which is a 1-4-5 change, A, D, E. That is, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. Surely one of Tommy's more subtly genius contributions to the band's songwriting. And once this finally became clear, you started to, of course, note other examples, naturally in their vintage covers, such as Do You Want to Dance, or Surfin' Bird, or Let's Dance, or Palisade Park, Time Has Come Today, but also originals like Rockaway Beach, Oh Oh I Love Her So, I Want to Be Sedated is a great example, and each side of Too Tough to Die concludes in 145 territory, with Chasing the Night built around a 145 riff, and No Go perhaps the most clearly rockabilly influence usage of the 145 layout. And if you expand further to the doo-wop change, which of course is just 145 with one more extra chord thrown in there, then you start to see connections to songs like Rock and Roll High School, Sheena is a Punk Rocker, and of course You're Gonna Kill That Girl, which is basically punk rock Dion, right? All of which to say is when reconciled, as purveyors of pop tradition, the Ramones had more black influence in their music than they realized. And no matter how far the band went to deconstruct pop composition to better fit their beginner raw ability parameters, they still, unconsciously, unknowingly, could not help but reflect the true soul undercurrent upon which all of rock and roll music is constructed. Hey, this is Tom with Buncombe Shinola. I hope you enjoyed my playing. I was hoping to avoid copyright strikes, but I will put a link to the original track in both stereo and mono in the description below. In the comments, please let me know what you think of Blitzkrieg Bop. Of course, it's always helpful to the channel if you like the video, share it, and to follow the channel, that is to subscribe. You'll never miss an update on new reviews. This is Tom. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you again soon. Coming up next will be Bonzo Goes to Bitburg.